in a better world, if there ever was one, and I think there are places in the world that are better than this society. I think we have to go back in history in order to find them, but they're there. In a better world, poetry would need no justification, but we have to justify it. We have to say why it matters. Some people think, people who read poetry constantly, or people who love poetry and not only read it but write it, they say that it is almost like a religious experience. And when I say that, I mean religion as reassembling, religar, religion, with the community, with the whole, with nature, etc. Children know that. Children love poetry. They sing it, they repeat it, they want it. They like to play with words. They like to make them rhyme, etc. Wallace Stevens, another great American poet, said once, "The purpose of poetry is to contribute to man's happiness." Now, you might think I'm very utopian. Yes, I am. But if anything can make you happy, can you think of things that make you happy? I'm sure it's not going to the mall, buying things. But if I sit at home and I read a beautiful poem about the wise attitude of a dog that sits on a porch and looks on into the horizon, I feel happy. And then I watch my dog, and he's doing the same thing. That's aesthetic pleasure. That's what I mean by aesthetic pleasure. And it needs no justification. Because a life without aesthetic pleasure is one not worth living, believe me. I'm sure you agree with me. Because if you live without music, you know that you're not happy. Young people and everybody, young people and old people, but especially adolescents, if they don't have music, they're not happy. The other thing is that poetry can tell you what concerns people. What are people's concerns? That's why there's a whole bunch of poets who have written about war. Or in Chile, there's a whole bunch of poets who have written about the coup, the military coup, and its effects. I know they've done it in prose as well, but poetry captures you through emotion and thought together. All right? Let's see. Read the following quotes and discuss them. We're not going to discuss them all, but let me read some of them. The purpose of poetry is to contribute to man's happiness. That's the one I just read. Aesthetic pleasure needs no justification because a life without pleasure is one not worth living. And that's by Dana Gioia, who's a young poet. Wallace Stevens is dead, of course, but Dana Gioia is a contemporary poet, and he has this beautiful book, which I strongly recommend, which is called An Introduction to Poetry, and that's where I got my title for my talk today, and it is in its 12th edition, and I strongly recommend it. It is edited by X.J. Kennedy, who's also a poet, and Dana Gioia, okay? The poet's central mission is to purify the word of the tribe. The words of the tribe, said Mallarmé in the 19th century in France. Poetry can break open locked chambers of possibility, restore numbed zones to feeling, recharge desire. That's Adrienne Rich. If you don't know her, I urge you to look her up. She's one of the American contemporary women poets who is absolutely outstanding. And she came to Chile Poesía and read from Allende's balcony to the people when they all got together some years ago here in Santiago. And I tell you, La Plaza de la Constitución was packed, and the streets around it was packed. So don't tell me poetry doesn't matter. It does matter. And she says, poetry can break open locked chambers of possibility. It can also restore numb zones to feeling, because sometimes in this rush, routine-like life that we have today in contemporary society, feelings are not the most important thing, right? And it can recharge desire, any kind of desire. Yes, it could be carnal desire too, but not only that one, but desire to transcend, desire to love, desire to understand, desire to see the other as yourself, all of that. Adrienne Rich, don't miss her. George Orwell, whom you might know by his novels more than anything else, wrote after the Second World War, one ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language. And this is important. It is controversial, but I think that the decay of language is a sign of the present political chaos. All you have to do is turn on the TV and see how people treat each other, what they say about each other, what language they use. And not only the political ones, those might be the worst, but not only those. You, as future teachers, or you as future whatever, in whatever profession, be careful with language, because language is power, but it creates reality. So poetry can connect you, not with decay, but with construction of a better society. Poetry will not answer all our needs, that's for sure. Nothing will answer all our needs, but it is art. And if it is art, it imagines and makes. Remember I told you poesis is the Greek word for making? Okay? So if poetry is art, it imagines and makes and gives you the imaginings. Art is action, but it does not cause action. Rather, it prepares us for thought. And that's what we lack today also. We complain and we say, but people are not thinking really, because they're voting for, like in the United States, Reagan, or what's his name, the big California guy, well, you know, Schwarzenegger. Or here, people want to vote for Farkas, and we say, oh, people are not thinking. So maybe if we read more poetry, people will start thinking. That's what Muriel Rukeyser said, another great American poet. Okay? Poetry is ancient. And you know that because I'm sure that in school you had to read El Poema del Cid in Chile, right? You had to read La Araucana, and that killed your love for poetry, I'm sure. But it was because how they taught it, not because they're not great poems, all right? But in Japan, they have this ancient form of poetry, which is called the haiku. Do you know what a haiku is? Okay, here's one. This is in Japanese, but I'm not going to try to read it to you. You can try it or ask someone who knows Japanese to read it to you. I'll read it in English. The summer grass, 'tis all that's left of ancient warriors' dreams. It hurts. Basho. When I read the poem, I think about Iraq, I think about Palestine,